Before we begin, let me say this clearly. This is not a motivational talk. This is not career advice. And this is definitely not a lecture about success. This is a conversation about something most of us realize too late. School prepared us for exams, but it did not prepare us for life. It taught us how to memorize, how to perform, how to compete, how to follow rules. But it never taught us how to deal with emotions, how to handle failure, how to understand ourselves, how to choose a path when there is no syllabus, and how to live without constantly feeling behind. If you've ever felt confused despite being educated, if adulthood feels harder than school ever did, if you've wondered why nobody taught you about money, relationships, emotions, or self-worth, this episode is for you. There are no visuals here, no slides, no shortcuts. Just one long, honest conversation about growing up without a manual. Listen slowly. Pause when needed. And don't rush to finish it, because understanding life takes time, and that's okay.
At some point in adult life, a strange realization hits you. It doesn't come during a crisis. It doesn't arrive with drama. It usually shows up quietly in the middle of an ordinary day when something small feels unnecessarily difficult. Managing emotions, making a decision, handling failure, talking to people, dealing with money. And suddenly, a thought crosses your mind. Why was none of this taught to me? You did well in school, or at least you tried to. You studied, you memorized, you passed exams, you followed rules, you did what you were told. And somewhere along the way, you were made to believe that if you did all this correctly, life would make sense later. That things would fall into place. That adulthood would be easier than childhood. But then adulthood arrived, and instead of clarity, there was confusion. Instead of confidence, there was self-doubt. Instead of stability, there was anxiety. And you started feeling like you missed something important, like everyone else got a manual for life, and you didn't. This confusion isn't rare. It's incredibly common. People from different cities, backgrounds, income levels, all carrying the same silent question. Why does life feel harder than exams ever did? School prepared us to answer questions. Life demands that we ask the right ones. School trained us to follow instructions. Life demands that we figure things out without guidance. And that gap between preparation and reality is where most people struggle. In school, the rules were clear. Study this chapter. Write this answer. Finish this exam in 3 hours. There was always a right answer, even if you didn't know it. Someone else did. And if you followed the system long enough, you were rewarded with marks, ranks, certificates. Life doesn't work like that. Life doesn't give you a syllabus. It doesn't tell you what's important. It doesn't give you model answers. It just starts asking questions and expects you to respond. How do you handle failure? How do you manage money? How do you deal with rejection? How do you choose a career when you don't know yourself yet? How do you talk about emotions when nobody taught you the language for them? And suddenly, the confidence you had in exams disappears. Because exams tested memory. Life tests judgment. Exams rewarded obedience. Life rewards awareness. Most of us were good students. That's the painful irony. We did what we were supposed to do. We followed the path. And yet, when life demanded skills beyond textbooks, we felt underprepared. This is not your failure. This is a design gap. School was never built to prepare you for life. It was built to standardize knowledge, to measure performance, to sort people into categories. And while that system may work for academic evaluation, it leaves huge blind spots when it comes to real living. Nobody taught us how to handle uncertainty. Nobody taught us how to sit with emotions. Nobody taught us how to communicate honestly. Nobody taught us how to fail without losing self-worth. So when these situations arrive, and they always do, we feel lost. We assume something is wrong with us, that we are weak, that we are behind, that everyone else knows something we don't. But look around carefully. Most adults are improvising. They are guessing. They are copying. They are surviving. Very few are actually prepared. School gave us marks. Life asks for meaning. School trained us to compete. Life requires us to cooperate, adapt, and emotionally regulate. And when you don't have those skills, life feels overwhelming even when nothing dramatic is happening. That's why so many people feel anxious in their 20s and 30s. Not because life is unfair, but because they entered it without tools. They were trained for exams, not for ambiguity. Think about it honestly. You were taught how to solve equations, but not how to resolve conflict. You were taught how to write answers, but not how to express feelings. You were taught how to score, but not how to recover from loss. And when you struggle with these things now, you don't call it lack of education. You call it personal failure. That belief is what hurts the most. This act is not about blaming schools or teachers. It's about recognizing a mismatch. The world changed. Life became complex. Emotional intelligence, adaptability, self-awareness became essential, but education systems stayed focused on exams. So people left school with certificates, but no clarity. With degrees, but no direction. With knowledge, but no understanding of themselves. And once you see this, something shifts inside you. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And you start asking, what was I never taught? That question changes everything because it replaces shame with curiosity. And curiosity is where growth begins. In the next act, we'll go deeper into what school actually trained us for and why those skills don't translate cleanly into real life. Not as criticism, but as understanding. For now, just sit with this thought. You're not late in life. You were early in realizing the truth. When we talk about school not preparing us for life, it's easy to misunderstand the point. This is not about saying education is useless. It's not about blaming teachers or mocking academics. School did teach us many things. The problem is not what it taught, it's what it prioritized. School trained us extremely well for one specific environment, a controlled system with clear rules, fixed timelines, predefined outcomes, and external validation. And within that environment, many of us did well. We learned how to listen, how to memorize, how to repeat, how to perform under exam pressure. These are not useless skills, but they are incomplete. The problem begins when we unconsciously assume that the same rules apply to life. In school, there was always a right answer. Even if you didn't know it, someone else did. Life rarely works that way. Most adult problems don't come with correct options. They come with trade-offs. You don't choose the right career, you choose one and deal with the consequences. You don't find the perfect relationship, you build one through communication, compromise, and growth. School never trained us for ambiguity. It trained us for certainty. In school, effort was linear. Study more, score more, miss a step, lose marks. Life is non-linear. You can work hard and still fail. You can make the right decision and still suffer. You can do everything correctly and still feel lost. When people experience this for the first time, it shakes them deeply because their entire belief system was built on predictability. School also trained us to value approval over understanding. Marks mattered more than curiosity. Rankings mattered more than learning styles. Being correct mattered more than being thoughtful. And slowly, we internalized a dangerous idea that our worth is measured by performance. That belief follows people into adulthood. They start measuring their value by salary, by titles, by social validation, by comparison. When they don't meet these benchmarks, they feel like failures. Not because they are failing, but because they were trained to equate performance with identity. School rewarded obedience. You followed instructions, you stayed within the syllabus, you didn't question too much, and you were considered a good student. Life, however, rewards awareness. It rewards questioning. It rewards adaptability. It rewards people who can think independently, regulate emotions, and navigate uncertainty. Many students who struggled in school thrive in life, not because they became smarter, but because life finally valued the skills they naturally had. Another subtle training school gave us was fear of mistakes. Mistakes were penalized, red ink, cross marks, low grades, embarrassment. Over time, mistakes stopped being learning opportunities and started becoming threats. This created adults who are afraid to try, afraid to fail, afraid to look foolish. In real life, growth requires experimentation. Careers change, businesses fail, relationships end, ideas evolve. But a mind trained to avoid mistakes struggles to move forward. It overthinks, it delays, it waits for certainty that never comes. School also trained us to wait for permission. Permission to speak, permission to move, permission to choose. And when adulthood arrives, suddenly no one gives permission anymore. You're expected to decide, but you were never trained to trust your judgment. This is why many people feel paralyzed when making life decisions. Not because the decisions are impossible, but because they never developed internal authority. They were taught to look outward for validation instead of inward for clarity. Let's talk about competition. School normalized comparison early. Ranks, scores, topper lists. The idea that someone always has to be ahead and someone always has to be behind. This mindset quietly damages self-worth. It makes people feel like they're constantly racing, even when there's no finish line. Life is not a classroom. There is no single timeline. Some people succeed early, some late. Some change paths multiple times, but a comparison-trained mind struggles to accept this. It keeps asking, am I ahead or behind? Instead of, am I aligned? School rarely taught collaboration properly. Group projects existed, but real teamwork, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, communication was missing. Life depends heavily on these skills. Careers grow through relationships. Opportunities come through people. But when emotional and social skills are underdeveloped, people struggle despite being intelligent. Then there's the silence around failure. School prepared us for success, not for falling apart, not for disappointment, not for rejection. When people fail in adult life, they often experience shame instead of learning. They internalize failure instead of extracting lessons. This leads to burnout, self-doubt, and emotional shutdown. Perhaps the biggest thing school never taught us was self-awareness, understanding strengths, accepting weaknesses, recognizing emotional patterns, knowing how you respond under stress. Life demands this constantly. School ignored it completely. So when adults feel confused about who they are, what they want, or why they react the way they do, it's not because they're immature. It's because nobody ever taught them to look inward. School taught us what to think. Life demands that we know how we think. School focused on outcomes. Life is shaped by processes. School rewarded certainty. Life requires resilience. Once you see this clearly, a lot of self-judgment starts to dissolve. You stop romanticizing the past and start understanding the present. You realize that struggling doesn't mean you failed education. It means education was incomplete. An incomplete education requires continuation, not criticism. In the next act, we'll talk about the biggest missing pieces of all: emotions, money, relationships, and self-worth, the things that shape daily life but were never part of the curriculum. For now, just reflect on this. You didn't waste your years in school, but you were never meant to stop learning there. There is a reason adulthood feels overwhelming even when life looks normal from the outside. It's not because life suddenly became cruel. It's because the most important subjects were never taught: emotions, money, relationships, self-worth. These are not side topics in life. They are the main syllabus. And yet, most of us entered adulthood completely untrained in them. Let's start with emotions, because this is where everything begins. School taught us how to control behavior, not how to understand feelings. Sit properly. Don't talk. Don't react. Follow rules. Emotions were treated like distractions, not information. If you were angry, sad, anxious, or confused, the goal was to suppress it, not understand it. So we grew up learning how to function, but not how to process. We became good at appearing fine, but not at being honest with ourselves. And when strong emotions show up in adult life, rejection, heartbreak, failure, pressure, we don't know what to do with them. We either explode or shut down. Because nobody taught us emotional regulation. Nobody taught us how to sit with discomfort without drowning in it. That's why so many adults struggle with overthinking. Overthinking is often emotional backlog. Feelings that were never acknowledged turn into repetitive thoughts. School rewarded logic and punished emotional expression. Life, however, demands emotional intelligence every single day, in work, in relationships, in decision-making. Now let's talk about money. For something that controls so much of adult life, it's shocking how little we were taught about it. We learned formulas, not finances. We learned how to calculate interest, but not how debt traps people. We learn how to solve word problems, but not how spending habits affect mental health. So people earn money but don't understand it. They spend without awareness. They save without clarity. They compare salaries without context. And money becomes a source of anxiety instead of stability, not because money is evil, but because ignorance creates fear. No one taught us how to budget without guilt, how to plan without obsession, how to separate self-worth from income. So people chase numbers thinking it will fix insecurity. It doesn't. It just changes the shape of anxiety. Then there are relationships, perhaps the most neglected subject of all. School never taught us how to communicate honestly, how to set boundaries, how to handle conflict without ego, how to listen without preparing a reply. Relationships were treated as personal matters, not life skills. So people grow up knowing how to score marks, but not how to have difficult conversations. They don't know how to express needs without sounding demanding. They don't know how to receive criticism without feeling attacked. They confuse attachment with love, control with care, silence with peace. And when relationships fail, friendships, romantic relationships, even family bonds, people blame fate, timing, or compatibility. Rarely do they realize that relationships are skills, and skills can be learned, but only if they are acknowledged as skills. School also never taught us about self-worth. It taught us how to earn validation through marks, through ranks, through praise. But it never taught us how to value ourselves independent of performance. So adults carry fragile self-esteem into the world. They feel confident only when things go well, and completely lost when things don't. That's why failure hurts so deeply. Not because failure is catastrophic, but because it threatens identity. When your worth is tied to success, failure feels like erasure. Life, unfortunately, doesn't care about this fragility. It tests people repeatedly, through rejection, through uncertainty, through comparison, and those without internal grounding feel constantly shaken. Another missing subject was decision-making. School made decisions for us. Subjects were chosen early, paths were predefined. Deviating was discouraged. Life, however, offers too many choices, and a mind trained to follow instructions feels overwhelmed when asked to choose. So people delay decisions, overthink endlessly, seek external validation. They ask everyone else what to do because they were never taught how to trust their own judgment. Even failure itself was never taught properly. Failure in school meant losing marks. In life, failure is information. It teaches boundaries, limits, direction. But when people internalize failure as shame, they avoid growth. They stay stuck in familiar discomfort instead of risking new discomfort. Perhaps the biggest loss is this: nobody taught us how to sit with ourselves, how to be alone without distraction, how to listen to internal signals, how to recognize burnout before collapse, how to slow down without guilt. So adulthood becomes reactive. People respond to life instead of understanding it. They move from one problem to another without reflection. They stay busy to avoid emptiness, productive to avoid discomfort, entertained to avoid silence. And yet deep down, they know something is missing. That missing piece is not intelligence. It's literacy, emotional literacy, financial literacy, relational literacy. School gave us certificates. Life demands wisdom, and wisdom doesn't come from exams. It comes from experience, reflected upon, not rushed through. Once you see this clearly, something important happens. You stop being angry at yourself. You stop comparing your journey to others. You stop expecting clarity without self-exploration. You realize that adulthood is not about arriving, it's about learning continuously. The frustration you feel is not failure. It's the tension between how you were trained and what life demands. And tension, when understood, becomes transformation. In the next act, we'll talk about what this gap creates in real life: career confusion, identity crises, comparison, and the feeling of being behind, even when you're moving forward. For now, sit with this truth. You were not unprepared because you were careless. You were unprepared because nobody prepared you. And now, the responsibility shifts to you. And yet, deep down, they know something is missing. That missing piece is not intelligence. It's literacy, emotional literacy, financial literacy, relational literacy. School gave us certificates. Life demands wisdom. And wisdom doesn't come from exams. It comes from experience, reflected upon, not rushed through. Once you see this clearly, something important happens. You stop being angry at yourself. You stop comparing your journey to others. You stop expecting clarity without self-exploration. You realize that adulthood is not about arriving, it's about learning continuously. The frustration you feel is not failure. It's the tension between how you were trained and what life demands. And tension, when understood, becomes transformation. In the next act, we'll talk about what this gap creates in real life: career confusion, identity crises, comparison, and the feeling of being behind, even when you're moving forward. For now, sit with this truth. You were not unprepared because you were careless. You were unprepared because nobody prepared you. And now, the responsibility shifts to you. One of the most confusing parts of adulthood begins with a simple question that sounds harmless on the surface. So, what are you doing in life? It's asked casually by relatives, friends, classmates, sometimes even strangers. But inside, it triggers something heavy because most people don't actually know how to answer it honestly. School trained us to answer questions clearly. Life asks questions that don't have clean answers. Career is one of them. In school, the path felt linear. Study hard, choose a stream, pick a course, get a degree, get a job, progress. That structure gave a sense of safety, but real life doesn't follow a straight line. Careers zigzag, interests change, industries evolve, people outgrow roles. And when reality deviates from the promised path, confusion sets in. This is where many people experience their first identity crisis. Not because they are failing, but because the identity they were given no longer fits. Student, topper, engineer, graduate. These labels worked in school. In adult life, they feel incomplete. And when you don't know who you are beyond labels, uncertainty feels terrifying. Career confusion is rarely about lack of options. It's about lack of self-understanding. People are told to choose wisely, but nobody taught them how to understand their strengths, temperament, values, or limits. So choices are made based on external logic, salary, stability, prestige, not internal alignment. And when work doesn't feel fulfilling, people assume something is wrong with them. They say things like, I should be grateful, or others have it worse. But dissatisfaction is not ingratitude. It's information. It's the mind saying, this doesn't fit. School trained us to ignore that voice. Another powerful force enters here, comparison. In school, comparison was structured. Ranks, marks, results. You knew where you stood. In adulthood, comparison becomes endless and invisible. Social media, LinkedIn updates, wedding announcements, promotions, achievements, all flashing constantly. A comparison-trained mind struggles here. It keeps asking, am I ahead or behind? And because life timelines are different for everyone, the answer is always unsettling. Someone your age earns more. Someone is married. Someone moved abroad. Someone started a business. And suddenly, your own journey feels inadequate, not because it is, but because you're measuring it with the wrong scale. School never taught us that life is not a race with a single finish line. It taught us to compete in a controlled environment. So when adulthood removes structure but keeps comparison, anxiety rises. Another silent struggle is the pressure to figure it out. People expect clarity at an age when self-discovery has barely begun. At 22, 25, 30, there's an unspoken expectation that you should know who you are, what you want, and where you're going. But how can you know yourself when you were never taught how to listen inward? So people pretend. They speak confidently about plans they're unsure about. They commit to paths they're not convinced by. They stay stuck because changing direction feels like failure. School reinforced this fear. Changing answers meant losing marks. Changing paths now feels like losing face. But growth often requires revision. Identity is not something you find once and lock forever. It's something you refine. But when people treat identity like an exam answer, right or wrong, they resist evolution. This creates a deep internal conflict. On the outside, people seem functional. On the inside, they feel disconnected. They go through routines without meaning. They work, earn, spend, repeat, but something feels missing. This is not laziness. This is misalignment. Another layer of confusion comes from validation. School gave clear feedback, marks, grades, praise. Adult life gives ambiguous feedback. Sometimes effort goes unnoticed. Sometimes success feels hollow. Sometimes recognition comes late or never. So people chase external validation aggressively. Titles, followers, income, achievements. Not because they want them, but because they need reassurance that they're doing okay. And when validation doesn't arrive, self-doubt grows. Nobody taught us how to self-validate, how to measure growth internally, how to define success personally. So we borrow definitions from society. And society's definitions are often shallow. This is why people feel pressure even when they're progressing, because they're not living their life, they're performing it. Another painful reality is that school never prepared us for uncertainty. Careers today are unstable. Roles change, skills expire, paths disappear. But school taught us that once you choose, you're set. So when things don't work out, people panic. They think they made the wrong choice. They regret past decisions. They wish for alternate timelines. But life doesn't punish wrong choices. It teaches through experience. The idea of a perfect path is an illusion created by exam systems. In life, clarity comes from movement, not overthinking. But a mind trained to avoid mistakes hesitates to move. So people stay stuck, not because they lack ability, but because they fear regret. What's rarely said is this: confusion is not a sign that you're lost. It's a sign that you're transitioning. Old identities no longer fit. New ones haven't formed yet. That in-between space feels uncomfortable, but it's necessary. School didn't teach us how to sit in that space. It taught us to rush towards answers. Adulthood asks for patience, for experimentation, for self-trust. And that trust doesn't come from marks. It comes from listening to yourself repeatedly, making decisions, learning from consequences, and adjusting. Comparison fades when identity becomes internal. When you know what matters to you, other people's timelines lose power. Career becomes less about impressing and more about aligning. Less about certainty and more about adaptability. And slowly, something shifts. The pressure to figure it out softens. You realize that life is not a problem to be solved, it's an experience to be understood. In the next act, we'll talk about how to bridge this gap. How to unlearn what no longer serves you, relearn what was missing, and become an adult without a manual consciously, not accidentally. For now, hold on to this truth. Feeling confused does not mean you're failing. It means you're thinking. And that is where real adulthood begins. At some point, usually after confusion settles into awareness, a quiet but important shift begins. You stop asking, why didn't school prepare me for this? And start asking, what do I need to learn now? This is the moment adulthood truly begins. Not when you earn money, not when you take responsibility, but when you realize that learning didn't end with education, it just changed its form. Unlearning is the first step, and it's harder than learning. Because unlearning means questioning beliefs that once kept you safe. Beliefs like there is a right path. Mistakes mean failure. Certainty comes before action, and approval equals success. These ideas work in school. In adult life, they create paralysis. One of the biggest things adults have to unlearn is the idea that clarity comes first. In reality, clarity comes after movement. You don't figure out who you are and then act. You act, observe how it feels, adjust, and slowly discover yourself. Waiting for clarity before starting often means never starting at all. School trained us to prepare endlessly before attempting anything. Life doesn't allow that luxury. You learn by doing, by trying, by failing, by refining. And this feels deeply uncomfortable for anyone trained to avoid mistakes. Another belief that needs unlearning is the fear of being wrong. School punishes wrong answers. Life rewards corrected ones. Every decision teaches something. Even regret contains information. But when people treat regret as proof of incompetence instead of feedback, they stop growing. Relearning begins with self-awareness, not the motivational kind, but the honest kind. Understanding how you respond under pressure. What drains you? What energizes you? What you avoid? What you seek validation for? These patterns matter more than any qualification. This is where resilience replaces certainty. You stop needing guarantees. You start trusting your ability to respond. And that trust builds only through experience, not theory. Another difficult but necessary relearning is redefining success. Success in school was visible and measurable. Adult success is internal. It's alignment, peace, sustainability, the ability to live without constant comparison. When success remains externally defined, dissatisfaction is inevitable. Relearning also means slowing down the urge to prove yourself. School rewarded visibility. Adult life often rewards consistency. Quiet progress matters more than dramatic leaps. But this only becomes clear when comparison loses its grip. One of the most important shifts happens when people stop asking, am I doing enough? And start asking, am I doing what matters? That question doesn't have universal answers. It requires self-honesty. And self-honesty grows in stillness. Becoming an adult is less about adding skills and more about integration. Integrating logic with emotion, ambition with well-being, independence with connection, discipline with compassion. School separated subjects. Life blends them. And finally, unlearning the need for constant certainty creates space for curiosity. Curiosity replaces fear. It turns life from a test into an exploration. You stop treating mistakes as verdicts and start seeing them as data. This is what real education looks like: lifelong, personal, reflective. You were never meant to graduate from life. You were meant to keep learning from it. In the final act, we'll talk about what it means to live a real life, not a report card life. How to measure growth without grades. How to define worth without ranks. And how to move forward with clarity, not pressure. For now, hold on to this idea. You are not late. You are learning at the right time. No one taught us how to reflect properly. We were taught to move on quickly. Finish the exam. Start the next chapter. Adult life needs reflection. Without it, experiences repeat instead of teaching. Another critical relearning is emotional responsibility. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions or overanalyzing them. It means recognizing that while emotions are not your fault, they are your responsibility. No one else can regulate them for you. No system can manage them on your behalf. School externalized regulation. Bells told us when to start and stop. Teachers controlled structure. Adulthood removes that scaffolding. You have to build internal structure, boundaries, routines, limits. Without becoming rigid, relearning also applies to relationships. Many adults continue operating with emotional habits formed in childhood or adolescence. Avoidance, people-pleasing, defensiveness, silence. These patterns feel familiar, but they don't create healthy connection. Healthy relationships require skills: listening without interruption, expressing needs clearly, handling disagreement without ego, apologizing without self-erasure. None of this was taught, so adults must learn it consciously, often painfully. Money, too, requires relearning. Many people carry inherited beliefs, fear, guilt, shame around finances. They either avoid money conversations or obsess over them. Financial maturity is not about earning more. It's about understanding behavior, spending patterns, emotional triggers, long-term thinking. Becoming an adult without a manual means accepting that uncertainty is permanent. There is no final state where everything feels settled. Life keeps changing. Roles evolve. Priorities shift. And maturity is the ability to adapt without losing yourself. This is where resilience replaces certainty. You stop needing guarantees. You start trusting your ability to respond. And that trust builds only through experience, not theory. Another difficult but necessary relearning is redefining success. Success in school was visible and measurable. Adult success is internal. It's alignment, peace, sustainability, the ability to live without constant comparison. When success remains externally defined, dissatisfaction is inevitable. Relearning also means slowing down the urge to prove yourself. School rewarded visibility. Adult life often rewards consistency. Quiet progress matters more than dramatic leaps. But this only becomes clear when comparison loses its grip. One of the most important shifts happens when people stop asking, "Am I doing enough?" and start asking, "Am I doing what matters?" That question doesn't have universal answers. It requires self-honesty. And self-honesty grows in stillness. Becoming an adult is less about adding skills and more about integration. Integrating logic with emotion, ambition with well-being, independence with connection, discipline with compassion. School separated subjects. Life blends them. And finally, unlearning the need for constant certainty creates space for curiosity. Curiosity replaces fear. It turns life from a test into an exploration. You stop treating mistakes as verdicts and start seeing them as data. This is what real education looks like: lifelong, personal, reflective. You were never meant to graduate from life. You were meant to keep learning from it. In the final act, we'll talk about what it means to live a real life, not a report card life. How to measure growth without grades. How to define worth without ranks. And how to move forward with clarity, not pressure. For now, hold on to this idea. You are not late. You are learning at the right time. At some point, you realize that life doesn't grade you. There are no final marks, no rankings, no toppers list at the end of the year. And yet, many adults continue living as if someone is watching, evaluating, and scoring every decision they make. This habit doesn't disappear after school. It follows people quietly into adulthood, shaping how they choose careers, relationships, lifestyles, and even happiness. A report card life is built around performance, how well you're doing compared to others, how impressive your choices look from the outside, how closely your life matches society's expectations. It's exhausting because there is no finish line. There's always someone ahead, always a new standard, always another comparison. A real life is different. It is not concerned with how things appear, but with how they feel. Not in a superficial sense, but in a sustainable one. It asks quieter questions. Am I growing? Am I learning? Am I becoming more honest with myself? These questions don't have immediate answers. They evolve over time. School trained us to chase completion. Finish the syllabus. Finish the exam. finish the course. Life is not meant to be finished, it's meant to be lived. But when people bring a completion mindset into life, they feel perpetually behind. Like they should have arrived by now. Real adulthood begins when you stop waiting to arrive. Living a real life requires redefining progress. Progress is not always visible. Sometimes it looks like choosing peace over pressure. Sometimes it looks like leaving a path that no longer fits. Sometimes it looks like staying and learning patience. These choices don't show up on LinkedIn, but they shape your internal life deeply. Another shift that defines a real life is learning to measure growth internally. Instead of asking, how much have I achieved? You start asking, how have I changed? Are you less reactive than before? More aware? More grounded? These changes are subtle, but they compound. A real life also accepts seasons. Seasons of growth, seasons of confusion, seasons of rest. School trained us for constant performance. Life moves in cycles. Fighting those cycles leads to burnout. Respecting them builds resilience. One of the hardest transitions is letting go of external validation, not rejecting it completely, but no longer depending on it. Praise feels good. Recognition helps. But when worth depends on it, life becomes unstable. A real life is anchored internally. It values self-respect over applause. This is where many people struggle because they were never taught how to self-validate. They learn how to perform for approval, not how to live with integrity. Rebuilding this takes time. It requires listening to yourself consistently, even when it's uncomfortable. A real life also involves conscious relationships. Not relationships that look good, but ones that feel honest, where communication is open, where boundaries are respected, where growth is mutual. School didn't prepare us for this. It taught us proximity, not intimacy. Money, too, becomes calmer in a real life. Not because there's always enough, but because there is awareness. Spending becomes intentional. Earning becomes purposeful. Comparison reduces. Money stops being a scorecard and starts becoming a tool. Living a real life doesn't mean lowering ambition. It means refining it. Ambition rooted in fear leads to exhaustion. Ambition rooted in clarity leads to consistency. When you know why you're doing something, pressure reduces. Another powerful shift is learning to be present without guilt. Doing nothing without feeling lazy, resting without justification, enjoying moments without documenting them. These are small rebellions in a performance-driven world. A real life also includes failure openly, without shame, without identity collapse. Failure stops being a verdict and starts being part of the process. This is something school never taught us, but life insists on. Perhaps the most important marker of a real life is emotional honesty. Being able to say, I don't know, I'm struggling, I need time, without feeling weak. Strength in adulthood is not certainty, it's self-awareness. When people stop living a report card life, comparison fades naturally. Not because others disappear, but because their journeys stop being relevant to your self-worth. You move at your pace, and that pace finally feels enough. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means life becomes clearer. Challenges still exist. Pain still arrives. But you respond instead of react. You reflect instead of rush. You adjust instead of panic. And slowly, without dramatic transformation, you realize something important. You are no longer trying to prove that you deserve a good life. You are simply living one intentionally. School prepared you to pass exams. Life asked you to understand yourself. School trained you to chase marks. Life invites you to seek meaning. And the moment you stop confusing the two is the moment life begins to feel real. If there is one thing to carry forward from this entire conversation, let it be this: you were never behind. You were trained for a different game. And now that you see the rules of the real one, you get to play it consciously. There is no graduation here, no final certificate, no perfect score. Just growth, just awareness, just a life that feels honest. And that is more than enough.
If you're still here, don't move just yet. 3 hours ago, this conversation started with a simple idea that school prepared us for exams, but not for life. And now, if there's one thing you should feel, it's this: clarity, not certainty, not confidence, just clarity. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to catch up with anyone. You don't need to prove that you're doing well. You were trained for a system that measured marks, ranks, and performance. Life doesn't work that way. Life asks for awareness, adaptability, emotional honesty, and patience. And those things are learned slowly, not tested. If this episode resonated with you, come back to it when life feels confusing again. Share it with someone who feels lost but can't explain why. And remember this, you are not behind in life. You were just trained for a different game. And now that you see the rules of the real one, you get to play it consciously. This is Brotomedia. Thank you for listening.